Before we start with our program, I wanted to give a quick introduction to Bahai.chat and a little bit also to the Baha'i faith. So Bahai.chat is a conversation series dedicated to our interconnectedness. It is an uplifting moment when we can turn our thoughts to spiritual ideas. Each weekly session is rooted in the Baha'i writings and the fundamental teachings of the oneness of God, religion, and humanity. These chats are led by people who really put these principles into action. Core to the Baha'i faith, and one of the really driving concepts for Bahai.chat is this idea of independent investigation of the truth, which means that nobody's faith should be conditioned on anything other than that person's search for and understanding of truth. And through Bahai.chat, we aim to explore truth at the deepest level, that of spiritual reality. In the Baha'i teachings, we understand that the oneness of mankind is a spiritual imperative, and we can't achieve this unity until justice is established. Baha'is try to approach things from a lens of justice and equity in whatever we're doing, whether it's in our schoolwork or our workplace or the interactions we have with friends and neighbors, it's really about sort of trying to embody these ideas and put them into practice. Today's session is quite special because it's a little bit different from other ones that we've had. And so now I'm going to turn it over to our Bahai.chat executive producer, David, to set us up for what we'll be enjoying today.
Well, thank you so much, Anissa. And you're right, it's a wonderful day. We'd like to welcome everyone on this special one of 9 Baha'i holy days, the Declaration of the Bab. 176 years ago, May 22nd, 1844, a spring day, Sayyid Ali Muhammad announced that he was the bearer of a divine revelation whose aim was to prepare the world for him whom God shall make manifest, a messenger of God known as Baha'u'llah. Baha'is refer to Sayyid Ali Muhammad by his title, the Bab, which is Arabic for the gate. The Bab would not publicly announce his mission until 18 souls, through dreams, some through visions, were each independently and mysteriously drawn to and recognized the Bab's station. The first of these letters of the living, as styled by the Bab himself, was a youth named Mullah Hussein. Here to share with us Mullah Hussein's own recounting of that eventful evening is actor Penn Badgley.
I felt myself drawn, as if by a magnet, toward Shiraz. And as I stood outside that city's gate, a youth approached me. I was overwhelmed with his gentle expressions of affection and loving kindness. He extended to me a warm invitation to visit his home and refresh myself after the fatigues of my journey. He bade me follow him. I was profoundly impressed by the gentle yet compelling manner in which that strange youth spoke to me. As I entered the house and followed my host to his chamber, a feeling of unutterable joy invaded my being. It was about an hour after sunset when my youthful host began to converse with me. Whom, after Sayyid Kazim, he asked me, do you regard as his successor and your leader? At the hour of his death, I replied, our departed teacher insistently exhorted us to forsake our homes, to scatter far and wide in quest of the promised beloved. I have accordingly journeyed to Shiraz, have arisen to accomplish his will, and am still engaged in my quest. Has your teacher, the Bab further inquired, given you any detailed indications as to the distinguishing features of the promised one? Yes, I replied. He is of pure lineage, of illustrious descent, and of the seed of Fatima. As to his age, he is more than 20 and less than 30. He is endowed with innate knowledge. He is of medium height, abstains from smoking, and is free from bodily deficiency. He paused for a while, and then with vibrant voice declared, "Behold, all these signs are manifest in me." When I first started upon my quest, I determined to regard two standards as those whereby I could ascertain the truth of whosoever might claim to be the promised one. The first was a treatise which I had myself composed, bearing upon the abstruse and hidden teachings propounded by Sheikh Ahmad and Syed Kazim. Whoever seemed to me capable of unraveling the mysterious allusions made in that treatise, to him I would next submit my second request, and would ask him to reveal without the least hesitation or reflection a commentary on the Surah of Joseph. I was revolving these things in my mind when my distinguished host again remarked, "Observe attentively, might not the person intended by Syed Kazim be none other than I?" I thereupon felt impelled to present to him a copy of the treatise which I had with me. "Will you," I asked him, "read this book of mine and look at its pages with indulgent eyes?" He graciously complied with my wish. He opened the book, glanced at certain passages, closed it, and began to address me. Within a few minutes, he had, with characteristic vigor and charm, unraveled all its mysteries and resolved all its problems. He then proceeded to say, "Now is the time to reveal the commentary on the Surah of Joseph." He took up his pen and with incredible rapidity revealed the entire Surah of Mulk, the first chapter of his commentary on the Surah of Joseph. The overpowering effect of the manner in which he wrote was heightened by the gentle intonation of his voice which accompanied his writing. Not for one moment did he interrupt the flow of the verses which streamed from his pen. I sat enraptured by the magic of his voice and the sweeping force of his revelation. I sat stunned and feeling the galling weight of guilt for having even thought of setting forth tests, which the Bab so effortlessly dispatched. He turned to me and smiled lovingly, bathing me in the warmth of his light and blotting out for that instant my shame. He then addressed me in these words: "This night," he declared, "this very hour will, in the days to come, be celebrated as one of the greatest and most significant of all festivals. O thou, who art the first to believe in me, verily I say, I am the Bab, the gate of God, and thou art the Bab-ul-Bab, the gate of that gate. 18 souls must, in the beginning, spontaneously and of their own accord, accept me and recognize the truth of my revelation. Unwarned and uninvited, each of these must seek independently to find me. And until that number is complete, it is incumbent upon you not to divulge either to your companions or to any other soul that which you have seen and heard." This revelation, so suddenly and impetuously thrust upon me, came as a thunderbolt which for a time seemed to have benumbed my faculties. I was blinded by its dazzling splendor and overwhelmed by its crushing force. Excitement, joy, awe, and wonder stirred the depths of my soul. Predominant among these emotions was a sense of gladness and strength which seemed to have transfigured me. How feeble and impotent, how dejected and timid I had felt previously. Now, however, the knowledge of his revelation had galvanized my being. I felt possessed of such courage and power that were the world, all its peoples and its potentates, to rise against me, I would, alone and undaunted, withstand their onslaught. The universe seemed but a handful of dust in my grasp. I seemed to be the voice of Gabriel personified, calling unto all mankind, "Awake! For lo, the morning light has broken. Arise, for his cause is made manifest. The portal of his grace is open wide. Enter therein, O peoples of the world, for he who is your promised one is come."
Thank you so much for that lovely reading, Penn. So wonderful to have you here with us. Happy Holy Day.
Thank you. You too. It's a blessing to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I'd like to also just take a moment and thank Josefina for the extraordinary piece of art I think it's called a paper cut, and it is a rendition of the very space that this encounter took place, this declaration took place. Thank you for that. Josefina is our tech master and also a wonderful artist. Well, here with us today is Steve Sarowitz, founder and chairman of Paylocity, a leading US provider of payroll and HR solutions. Steve is an international philanthropist with an interest in promoting unity, universal education, and advocating for the elimination of racism, sexism, nationalism, and religious prejudice. He serves as executive producer for the award-winning documentary Maya Angelou and Still I Rise, and the film The Gate, Dawn of the Baha'i Faith, a groundbreaking documentary about the founding of the Baha'i Faith. Steve, so wonderful to have you with us here today. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you for having me, as always, David.
I see you're in your favorite surrounds.
I am.
What is the view?
We're looking at the Shrine of the Bab. So Penn, in his beautiful voice, just told us about the how the Bab declared. And this is actually it took 59 years after the Bab was so brutally martyred for his remains to be buried here, and another 91 years for these terraces behind me to be built. But this is the beautiful Shrine of the Bab, 19 terraces going up Mountain Carmel, and the middle terrace is the amazing Shrine of the Bab. So this is where he rests today.
And of course, this is
in golden splendor. He lived in darkness. The authorities, the religious authorities that persecuted him, put him in a dark cell, but look at where he is today.
And of course, this is the very spot where Baha'u'llah, on his fourth successive exile, pitched his tent on Mount Carmel, as prophesied in the Old Testament. And what's so extraordinary is that this mountain, which you're looking at, is really a desert. And the Universal House of Justice, of course, over a period of years, bringing in new forms of irrigation and just extraordinary, paying homage to this extraordinary figure, the Bab. Steve, you're a relatively new Baha'i like me. You come from a Jewish background, but take a minute and talk a little bit about your journey. What attracted you to the faith? What's your story?
When I was about 20 years old, I was a college student, and I first heard about the faith. Someone was nice enough to come to my school and teach at the Jewish Student Center the idea of progressive revelation, which has always intrigued me, which is the idea that instead of there being warring gods, a Jewish God and a Christian God and a Muslim God, etc., there's only one God, and that the messenger, the holy messengers who founded all the faiths, are really all sent by the same God, and that the idea is that these different faiths are really the same faith, different phases, different chapters, you might say, in the same book. And I love that idea, and I didn't do anything with it for over 20 years. I actually studied Christianity starting in my mid-20s, but it wasn't until my mid-40s that a friend of mine asked me to study the Baha'i faith, and I was very interested. I said yes, and after a few years, I ran home to my wife and said, I'm a Baha'i now. And my wife is Catholic. We were waiting for our kid's bar mitzvah, and she said, no, you're not. You have to wait 2.5 more years until after the bar mitzvah. So I was waiting for the bar mitzvah, and this is where fate intervened. Actually, I'm going to switch my background real quick. I was invited to go to Akko by Bill Strickland, a very dear friend of mine. We were building centers together, and he said, we were building a center on the west side of Chicago, and he said, I'd like to build a center for Jews and Arabs in Akko, Israel. And I about fell out of my chair. Here I was wanting to be a Baha'i, but waiting to be a Baha'i. And Bill said, let's go to Akko and build a center there. So we did. We built this beautiful center called Bahai.chat, which is in Akko today doing great work. And I happened to walk into this garden, which is the Shrine of Baha'u'llah, on September 12, 2014, and completely changed me. Before, you would have said I was an entrepreneur who had an interest in the Baha'i faith. Now I'm a Baha'i who has a slight interest in entrepreneurship. And I literally couldn't say anything but talk about the Baha'i faith for over a year. After that, I had a lot of physical changes. I was only sleeping for 3 or 4 hours a night. For months after that, I My wife told me, oh, you're going to get sick. I never got sick. For actually the next 18 months, I didn't even get a cold. And just had so much energy and so much desire to learn more about the faith. So I really did a lot of reading after that happened. And actually within 6 months, I declared as a Baha'i.
Well, talking about the writings, I know we ask all of our presenters to select one or more writings. And I remember when you and I were chatting earlier in the week, you got very excited about this particular quote from the writings of the Bab. We're going to share it today. And let's bring that quote up, Anissa, and read it for us.
Sure. So it says, "There is no paradise more wondrous for any soul than to be exposed to God's manifestation in this day, to hear his verses and believe in them, to attain his presence, which is not but the presence of God, and to sail upon the sea of the heavenly kingdom of his good pleasure, and to partake of the choice fruits of the paradise of his divine oneness."
So beautiful. Thank you, Anissa. What is it in particular, Steve, that kind of speaks to you about that quote?
The whole thing. What really speaks to me is the idea, this transcendent joy that you get from recognizing the manifestation in their day. I believe that what happens every time, a messenger of God, the idea, I've asked this question in some groups, how do you recognize a messenger of God? And I don't think people are really thinking about that. Most people are born into a religion and they do one of two things. They either accept that religion and follow that religion without looking to see they're not really investigating to see if it's the truth or not, or they're just following it, or they reject that religion. But most people don't do the third option, which I think is the best option, which is a search for truth. And that's actually what I did. I wasn't that great at it. I know a lot of people who are much better, who got to the answers a lot faster than me. It wasn't until I was 49 that I became a Baha'i. But I think once you reach that peak, and once I hit that garden, and I'd already been studying for a few years, I cannot describe the amount of joy I felt. And so people ask me, why do you tell everyone about the Baha'i faith? Why are you so insistent? I said, because you're going to share it. If you have this incredible treasure, why wouldn't you share it? And that quote really says it better than anything, that this is and I believe it with every ounce of my being, to recognize the manifestation of God in their day is the greatest joy. And there's nothing even close to it.
It's interesting. We're talking really about progressive revelation versus sort of traditional religion. And Baha'u'llah said that traditional religion was really the worst curse man has ever known, because by simply adhering to our fathers' belief, we really are robbed of that sort of process of investigating truth for ourselves. And we had a couple of weeks ago, we had Justin Baldoni on with us, and we had so many extraordinary folks who had turned out who follow him. And we're going to do this again today. We invited people to let us know if they wanted to know more, if they wanted to have sort of a personal guide that would help them get started. And there were about a half a dozen women who came forth, all very different, but all very spiritual and from different places, different ages. But the theme was the same. They had all found themselves over the years in circumstances where they were in a religious community, different ones, and there was sort of an expectation that they would act a certain way, that they would think a certain way. And they each of them said they bore that for a period of time, but it got to the point where they just couldn't do it anymore, and they wanted to break out and begin to really investigate the faith. Now, you're pretty passionate about sharing the stories of the faith with others, and decided pretty early in your Baha'i life to produce this feature film about the Bab, the Prophet Herald, forerunner of Baha'u'llah. What motivated the making of The Gate?
So I've been a Baha'i for all of 3 days. I knew nothing. And my friend Farshid, we're both in the payroll business, HR business. He said to me, I told him, I just want to retire and I'm going to teach the faith. I've done very well in business. I don't need to work. And he says, well, you could do that and reach hundreds of people, but if you made a film, you could reach millions of people. Well, less than an hour later, I get an email from Peter Samuelson, a movie producer who's made 25 films, the most popular of which is called Revenge of the Nerds, which a lot of you young people may not have heard of, but was very popular back in the day of old people like me. And so he was actually emailing me about philanthropy, but I ended up asking him about the movie, and it kind of put me on this course to make the movie. I always say that, you know, if I'd ever made a movie before, if I'd been a Baha'i more than 3 days, I would have been smart enough not to take on this incredible challenge, but I'm glad that I did. I think it was a 3-year odyssey to make The Gate. It was named the best religious documentary of 2018. I encourage everyone to see it. It's available for free now on YouTube. It's a wonderful story. The star of it is really the Bab. The Bab was an amazing messenger. His life was incredible. They call the story of Jesus Christ the greatest story ever told. I call the story of the Bab the greatest story never told, because a lot of people haven't heard it. Even Baha'is sometimes are not as aware how incredible the life of the Bab was. And you know, just what that little bit that Penn read, the whole movie's like that. It's like a tapestry of spirituality. And I really think that people have missed this. And I think someday in the future, people, young kids, instead of playing cowboys and Indians or cops and robbers or video games, will be actually playing Dawnbreakers, imitating the people who followed the Bab. I mean, incredible. 20,000 people, more than 20,000 people sacrificed their lives for him. And that's the kind of loyalty and passion that he engendered in people.
Well, one of the things I think that's interesting about the film, you talk about the star of the film being the Bab, but of course we know as Baha'is, Baha'u'llah forbade the public likenesses of the prophets of God. It really is something that is not respectful. And so it'd be interesting, he is the star and yet not seen in the film itself. Now you selected a particular clip that we're going to share in just a minute here, but you want to set that up for us, or should we just watch it?
Let's just go ahead and watch the clip and I can talk about it afterwards.
Okay. Anissa and Josefina.
The new revelation. The people were expecting the return of the 12th Imam, but the message delivered by him was radically different. The message they spread was that all people and all things come from the same Creator and are sacred, beautiful, and worthy of respect. It didn't matter if you were a king or a goat herder in the eyes of God. External traits such as race, gender, and nationality are not the true human reality. Instead, each of us are like mirrors reflecting the light of God's revelation.
The message of the Bab was a charismatic message, it was a creative message, and it was well received by the society.
He reinvigorated the process of religion itself. He taught the purity of religious faith and devotion, that you could pray from your heart, that you could find the truth for yourself. And this was inspiring to the masses.
Can you imagine that the Bab comes to this tyrannical place in Persia where there's no rule of law. They've got orthodoxy that's been in place for centuries, and the country was suffering greatly, both economically and spiritually. A lot of poverty, a lot of war. And he comes to this place where you're not free to think, and he has this transcendent way saying, look, independently investigate truth. This was a place where you had no freedom to do that. So it was really radical. And this, if you can imagine fire on a dry plain, this is how forest fires started. It really was like a forest fire all across Persia. And the Persian authorities, the religious authorities, did everything they could to tamp it down. They put the Bab in a remote prison, but that warden became a believer. And so they had to put him in another remote prison. And that warden became a believer. They put him on trial and asked him who he was. And he says, I am the promised one you've been waiting for 1,000 years. And, they tried to put him in the deepest, darkest hole. And no matter what, the faith kept growing. And so they took to murdering the Babis. They would literally tear them limb from limb or put lighted candles in them and burn them. I don't even want to talk about what they did. They literally just were holding on by their fingertips. This thing that lit on fire. And you compare this actually to even like, you know, we think of Jesus as being so powerful or Muhammad as being so powerful. The Bab only ministered for 6 years before he was murdered. Jesus ministered for 3 years and just had a handful of followers when he was killed. Muhammad had barely any followers for the first decade. So this incredible growth of the Bab's faith is really unparalleled in history, how fast it grew. And that was despite them trying to put it down. And the reason is it just was so attractive to these people who have been deprived. Imagine you've been deprived of oxygen, and then someone brings oxygen, or you've been starved for food. This was spiritual food for the Persian people who've been so deprived for so long.
You know, let me just mention before we go on, I'm not sure if folks are already sending questions in. Anissa, if you need to give a quick announcement how to do that, or just post it in the chat. But we're going to be taking questions from all the participants here momentarily. And but you know, you're talking. What's extraordinary about this time is that it's a period of Adventism, not just in Iran, but and in the Middle East, but throughout the Western world as well. Groups of Christians waiting for, in the year 1844, waiting for the return of Christ, if you will, all the followers of all of the world's religions. And so what we're talking about here really is the sort of universal coming anticipated and prayed for by followers of all religions and spoken to by the founders of all the major world religions. Isn't that right?
Well, and there were Christian movements at the time in Germany, France, Scandinavia, Sweden, Holland. There were 700 ministers in England, 300 ministers in America. The biggest one in America was a man named William Miller. So the same year that the Bab declares, William Miller promises his 100,000 followers that Christ will return and they're going to get raptured up to heaven and the world's going to end. I'm actually a big William Miller fan. He was a great Christian, very dedicated, very passionate. And he got the year right. He did get something wrong. The end of the world was wrong. But that wasn't William Miller's fault. You see, at the time, Bibles said that the world would end. And now those same Bibles say end of the age. Everywhere it said end of the world. And so he was looking for the end of the world when he should have been looking for a new age. And we're clearly in this new age. So the Bab declares in 1844. Another thing that's predicted in the Bible is the return of the Jews to Israel. Well, you see, we've got Israel here. That starts in 1844. With the Ottoman Edict of Toleration. The other thing that starts is this great age of invention. First major invention happens literally the day after the Bab declares, what hath God wrought? The first telegraph. So it starts revolutionizing telecommunications. So travel, telecommunications, every aspect of human endeavor has been revolutionized since 1844. 75% of the inventions ever in the world, ever invented, have been invented since 1844. So we're clearly in this new age that the Bible predicted. The year is right. In fact, the Bible predicts 10 times about the year 1260, which was the year that the Bab declared. And it really actually, if you read those sections, it actually is literally talking about the Muslims, which I think that's amazing because the Muslim calendar hadn't yet been invented. The Christian calendar hadn't yet been invented, yet the book of Revelation actually talks about this number 1260 over and over again. And yes, it's in 1260. So,
and 1260 Islamic calendar is 1844 Christian Gregorian calendar.
Yes, and if you actually look at it, it's talking about the advent of Muhammad and Ali, his chosen successor. It's said in the Baha'i writings that Abdul Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, says this in chapter 11 of the book of Revelation. It talks about Muhammad and Ali and how they'll rule over the holy city for 1,260 days, the holy city being Jerusalem. And so it is in 1260, 1844, that you get the Ottoman Edict of Toleration, and you start getting the return of the Jews. To me, it's just amazing that all this has come to play. But going back to the clip again, the most important thing in the clip, and the most important thing about the Baha'i faith is unity. The most important thing we have to remember is this is all about the unity of humanity, the end of religious tyranny, the end of racial prejudice, the end of sexism, the end of nationalism. It's the idea that we're one human family, that we're all equal. That, you know, of course, me being a successful entrepreneur, I could act like a king, but I'm no better than a goat herder. I'm just a person. You're just, David, you're also a successful entrepreneur. We are no better or worse than anyone else. And that's the whole idea with the Baha'i faith. And I think it's so necessary today during COVID, where this terrible disease, this pandemic is scourging the whole earth. We need to work together, and we need to work with love and kindness to all fellow human beings. And I can't say, I'm this and you're that, I'm not going to help you. We're in it together. And we're in all of this together. The environment has a lot of challenges. We have to have, as Baha'u'llah says, a world-embracing view. And that's what the Bab died to bring that message forward. And so we as Baha'is have to exemplify and spread this message.
Thank you so much for that. Anissa, have we got some questions lining up here? Come on board.
Yeah, we have a few people who've been sending some things in, so we can start asking those.
Why don't you field those?
Sure. So Steve, the first one I have for you, someone's wondering if you faced challenges when you first became a Baha'i and sort of how you coped with those.
Absolutely. So I'm the only Baha'i in my family, so it was a big challenge. They all thought I'd gone crazy. All of a sudden I had this incredible love. It's interesting because I've always believed in God, and so I think it was really hard for my wife to understand this newfound love for Baha'u'llah. It was literally, she literally thought I'd gone crazy, and we looked it up, and so I had the symptoms of either going crazy or having a religious transformation. I said, well, since I had a religious transformation, let's go with that one. So she had me even go to a psychologist, and I went to the psychologist, and the psychologist said, no, you're perfectly sane. I said, no signs of craziness, but your religious journey sounds interesting. Tell me more about that. And so I did. It's been a great journey. I have to say I've been overall extremely happy. The one thing about being a Baha'i is I face challenges, but I have the faith always. And the faith makes me happy. Every day I have this huge depth. It's like of currency that brings me to happiness. Money can't buy happiness, but spiritual currency can. And every day, even if you try to push me down underwater, I'll come back up. So yes, I've had challenges, but there's never, ever been a single day where I haven't been thankful to be a Baha'i.
Someone else is wondering, kind of on a similar vein, about some of the spiritual practices that really call to you. And then kind of with that, how you knew when to fully declare.
So the spiritual practices, we pray every day. I love the fact that as a Baha'i, we can pray. In fact, it's worked out well with COVID, that we pray alone. Daily prayer is really important to me. We say 99 Allahu Paus, which is God is most glorious. So every day I say it this way, every day you have to feed your soul. I mean, we wouldn't think about not feeding our body, but we are careless about not feeding our souls. And so I love to say this to young people today who I think particularly are spiritually starved. You're going to feed your spirit. I mean, you're going to do it. So you have to choose. Do you want to feed it something positive, or are you going to feed it spiritual junk food? Are you going to play video games or drugs or alcohol? I said, what's going to make you a lot happier in the long run is great spiritual food. And so I love, the other thing that the Baha'i faith prescribes is reading the writings morning and night. And I love the Baha'i writings with a capital L. So I love Abdul Baha, Paris Talks, Some Answered Questions, the Hidden Words. I've memorized the first half of the Hidden Words from Baha'u'llah. And I just think these things, they're uplifting to your soul. And they've helped me. It's interesting, even in business, I'm able to run, to me, businesses. I thought it would be harder, but actually as I've gotten back into the business world, it's gotten easier because I just apply Baha'i principles. And they're very practical and they work. There's a Baha'i practice called consultation, and we use it actually in our family foundation. Even though most of the people aren't Baha'is, they actually start saying, they're very fond of saying we use consultation. And what consultation is that we take in everybody's ideas, and the second an idea leaves your mouth, it's not yours anymore. And so it's a much more positive, interactive, and open discussion when you do that. So as far as me deciding to declare, I had a friend of mine who told me, she said to me, so let me get this straight. You're going all around the world giving out Baha'i books, telling everyone how great the Baha'i faith is, and then you tell everyone you're Jewish and waiting for your kid's bar mitzvah. So I waited for a very special day to declare, and I did. And I declared on February 10th, 2015.
Thank you. There was also a question about your Jewish background and how maybe how some of those references are paralleled and how Judaism has brought you clarity about the Baha'i faith as well.
I would say it's vice versa. The Baha'i faith has given me clarity about Judaism. When I was Jewish, I was just a cultural Jew. I mean, I went to temple every, a few times a year, but I didn't understand even what Judaism was. I had no idea. To me, I was just a Jew. I was born a Jew, and it was something I was born into. And it never occurred to me that Judaism was really a belief. And I didn't know what Christianity was, and I didn't really know how it interfaced with Judaism. Progressive revelation has so clarified my world, and it's made it much cleaner and less confrontational, because I was always a little worried because we were different than Christians. I didn't know how, but I was always a little worried. And I don't worry about that anymore. I don't worry about someone hating me for my religion, because I know it's on them, not me now. When I was Jewish, my family lost 19 people in the Holocaust, and that affects you. Even a couple generations later, my great-grandpa, who I'm named after, was killed in a Holocaust. And I think becoming a Baha'i was very healing to me in terms of the suffering. It almost cleared up the suffering my family had endured. And it was very hard for my family, particularly my father who'd lost so many members of his family. And he said, you've betrayed your family. And I said, Dad, ultimately, and he finally got this. It took him a couple years. I said, Dad, I really haven't betrayed my family. What I've done is I've taken up preventing the next Holocaust from happening by spreading universal love. And that's what we really need. The Holocaust happened because we hadn't done that.
Yeah. Someone's asking, for those of us who have a great desire to create impact in the world, but don't have the avenue to do so, what are the best ways to start?
Start with yourself. First of all, make sure you're spiritually educated. It starts at home. And then, as Baha'u'llah says, take a world-embracing view. So I'm blessed with a lot of money. Maybe some say cursed, and it's a bit of each, actually, if you read the Baha'i writings. But you don't need money to do this. If you just do this tomorrow, meet every person you meet with agape love, with just beautiful love, and see the soul in every person you meet. So have a world-embracing view, and every time there's a problem, don't think me. Think us. So start embracing the world as us, and every person you meet as the collective us, and watch how your world changes.
We had a question come in from Facebook. Somebody's asking, how is the Baha'i faith different from Unitarian Universalism? And I think that's an interesting question too, because when people say, oh, well, what is the distinction between just loving everybody versus being a Baha'i? So how do you kind of interpret that?
Well, I've got a couple answers. First of all, kudos to the Unitarians. They have a lot of things in common with the Baha'is. As a Baha'i, we should consort with members of all faiths with love and amity. And so what I like about universal Unitarianism is I like their idea of the oneness of humanity. They really get that. What is different about the Baha'i faith and what we have that's unique is really the Baha'i writings. So with Unitarianism, I think they've taken a few of the Baha'i concepts without understanding that this entire age has been wrought by Baha'u'llah. So if you really look at it, he's given us a roadmap to world peace and systematically how to get there, the instructions. And so as a Baha'i, I'm in this structure. We have world government. I mean, people ask, well, when are you going to have world government? Well, we have it already. We have a democratically elected world government in the Universal House of Justice. Now, right now, there's only, let's say, 7 million Baha'is who elect that world government, but it could be 70 million under the same structure, or 700 million, or even 7 billion. And so as Baha'is, we've really got the solutions. With Unitarianism, you've got the ideas, but you really don't have this, because there's not a scripture there to really tell you what the solution is. With Baha'is, we have the laws of Baha'u'llah, which frankly are tough for some people. They're tough for everybody. There's always a law or two for everybody, every Baha'i. Wow, that's tough for me. But I really believe those laws are a gift to humanity. There's a little meme I saw recently about looking in scripture for love, or looking starting with love and then looking at scripture. And then that second one is how we should be. It should start with the love and then look at the words. And so a lot of people interpret religious law as being harsh and intolerant and judgmental. Jesus said, judge not, lest you be judged. Baha'u'llah says, breathe not the sins of others, so long as thou art thyself a sinner. And so the idea that these laws are against you is just it's a problem because people have taken them out in the wrong way. Those laws are to help humanity. And if you look in every age, and this is really where the Baha'i faith is different, every age is really centered on a religion. After Moses, it was the Jewish faith, and it was a Jewish golden age following the laws of Moses, and that was the kingdom of Israel. After Zoroaster, you have the great Persian Empire, which arises and lasts for over 1,000 years following Zoroastrian law. Buddhists next, and you have the great Maurya Empire, which hits 2 million square miles. Jesus, the Byzantine Empire, following Christian law, and following Muhammad, these incredibly depraved people that he comes to rise up, and it's the great golden age of Islam, which lasts over 500 years and gives us algebra and algorithms and chemistry and universities. And so these are the building blocks for today's society. And so these innovations today, for example, like looking at you, this lovely, intelligent young woman, you're free now to do so many things to such a large extent because of the teachings of Baha'u'llah about the absolute equality of women, the oneness of race, the idea of the earth as one country and mankind as citizens, and the idea of a single religion of God. All of these ideas of Baha'u'llah's are spreading throughout the world and need to spread more so that the world can truly thrive. So you asked me about Unitarianism. I think Unitarianism has some good ideas, but what the Baha'i faith has is really the entire roadmap, the entire plan, and the entire system to get humanity there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that also responds, we had some questions come in about what does this lesser peace look like that we're ultimately trying to establish. And I think the way I see it is it really is about, on this grand collective scale, working towards these ideals of equity and justice and sort of prioritizing these spiritual principles in our society.
The lesser peace is less of a concern to the Baha'is because that's going to be wrought by outside influences largely. The most great peace is our concern, and that's in our hearts. Mm-hmm. Christians, I know, are fond of saying one heart at a time, and Baha'is say the same thing. And lest you think we stole it, just if anyone's from a Christian background, we haven't. It's the same religion. From our perspective, from my perspective as a Baha'i, I'm a Christian who loves Baha'u'llah. I'm a Jew who loves Baha'u'llah. These are the same lessons. And so this idea of changing hearts one at a time is a Christian idea, and it's a Baha'i idea. It's the idea of getting the Christ spirit in every person. We believe as Baha'is that Christ spirit was Baha'u'llah. The most recent, let's say, return of Christ would be Baha'u'llah. And this idea of universal love is coming from him, and that needs to be spread. And so as Baha'is and the writings and the teachings of Baha'u'llah, we really need to spread this absolute incredible love for every human being you come across.
We had a question from someone who shared that when they come from a family with different religious backgrounds, and when they were 16, they completed the first book of the Ruhi sequence and declared as a Baha'i, but faced backlash. So they asked, how do you deal with these people who are kind of ignorant and might criticize this choice, especially for a person who's so young?
Well, first of all, you're amazing. I mean, just absolutely amazing. 16 years old to do that. So I pray that you are steadfast in your love of Baha'u'llah. Please don't let them pull you down, because you've done an amazing thing by finding Baha'u'llah on your own. But understand that the people who are trying to pull you down are doing so out of fear and ignorance, and you should love them. The number one thing, going back, is love them and view them as a soul. The goal, there's a great story about Abdul-Baha. Abdul-Baha had this clergyman who hated him for 24 years. This man would publicly berate Abdul-Baha. He would turn his face in his presence. He would insult him. And Abdul-Baha for 24 years, because the clergyman was poor, would give him food and clothing and was nothing but kind to him. And finally, after 24 years, this clergyman noticed his kindness and said, "Why are you being so kind to me?" And Abdul-Baha started talking. They had a conversation and they became friends. It took 24 years to break down the barriers. So be very patient and kind and loving, and really demonstrate to them what a Baha'i is. Some of it is they're testing you. They're scared. They're scared you're right. And by the way, I believe you're right. And don't let their fear affect you negatively. Love them and really love them and embrace them. And, you know, sometimes you might have to distance yourself a little bit when they're being too bad. And there are things about that. But as much as you can, just be loving and kind and patient. You've been given these tools in the Baha'i writings in order to rise above, and show them how much you're rising above by being kind. Abdul Baha says that a thought of war must be overcome by a stronger thought of love. And so continually do that when you're attacked.
Thank you for that. We have maybe about like 10 more minutes to chat. So I wanna bring it back to the Bab. And we've had a lot of people asking about the film that you produced, The Gate, about the life of the Bab. And you mentioned how this is, you know, the greatest story never told. And I'm wondering if there's a component of the Bab's life or his character or whatever that you learned through the making of this film that stood out to you.
Well, his life story, his life story is just so amazing. So here's this basically uneducated. Here's a few little stories about the Bab. He goes to school when he's 6, and the teacher says, read for me from the Quran. He's teaching him how to read. And the Bab says, oh, I won't read it. I need to know what it means. This is a very strange request. So the teacher says, he reads it to him and he tells him what it means. And the Bab then proceeds to correct the teacher and tells him in an incredibly transcendent way what it actually means. The teacher takes the Bab by the hand, takes him home to his uncle who's raising him because his father's passed away, and says, I can't teach him anything else. And so essentially the Bab doesn't get any kind of regular education. He's uneducated. And he learns enough to read and write, etc., but he doesn't have much of a regular education. And yet this uneducated merchant, he comes from a merchant family. So this great scholar, Mullah Hussein, comes to him and starts questioning him. And Mullah Hussein, by the way, his greatest regret later in life was that he actually questioned the manifestation of God. But the Bab it literally blows him away, as he does to Vahid, who's sent down with a sword to kill him. So the king sends his number one trusted religious scholar to test this unknown merchant and to kill him if he isn't who he says he is. And Vahid listens to him, and they meet 3 times. The 3rd time they meet, this is also a wonderful story, and I just picture this as being an incredible scene. The Bab starts revealing the word of God, and he reveals it hour after hour, and he literally has to revive Vahid, who's passed out, watching the power of the revelation from a messenger of God. And at the end of this, Vahid says, if all the powers on earth were leagued against me, I would not abandon my confidence in this cause. So the Bab is just trial after trial and triumph after triumph. There's another thing where there's a governor who is a Christian who's become a Muslim, but only on paper. And he asks, really tell me who Muhammad was. He really didn't believe in Muhammad. And so the religious scholars were all flummoxed trying to figure out how to teach this Christian, essentially, who Muhammad was. And the Bab just picked it up right on the spot and explained to him, and he became a believer. There was miracle after miracle. We don't talk about miracles very much. I guess we can talk about one little miraculous thing, and that is, and we call it a mystery. Before they go to execute the Bab, they go to get him out of his cell. And the Bab says, oh, I'm sorry, you can't kill me right now. No earthly force can take me till I'm ready to go. But they take him anyway, and they tie him up against the wall with a follower of his, Anisa, probably named after Anis. And the Sam Khan, the head of the regiment, gives the order. 750 rifle shots ring out in front of a crowd of thousands of people. And when the smoke clears, the ropes are shot through. Anis is standing there unharmed, and the Bab has just disappeared in front of thousands of people. It was pandemonium. And so they do this frantic search, and they find him back in his cell. And the Bab says very calmly, I finished my mission now you can kill me. And so they go and they tie him up again. Sam Khan actually walked off the job, and they had to get a whole nother regiment to shoot him. But there was so many exciting moments in his life, and it's just amazing. Like I said, it's an amazing story. I could say I'm a great movie maker. I made up this great story, but I didn't. I just did my best to get out of the way and let the story tell itself.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, there are so many moments in the Bab's life that are really just incredible to hear, and you know, to think too about the bravery of those around him is so incredibly inspiring, because it's hard to, you know, think about this manifestation of God and try to emulate this individual's behavior as mere human beings, but also to think about the power of individuals like Vahid or Anis, and how they really stepped up when faced with these great challenges is quite inspiring and quite moving.
It's hard enough, you know, the last question about the 16-year-old who became a Baha'i, it's hard enough for he and I to deal with families that, you know, probably much harder for him because I was older, but families that don't necessarily embrace our new views and our new beliefs. But think how hard it was then, because there was, you know, we're talking about a religion that didn't exist and you're one of the first believers. It is, and they were in such a terrible, as I said, tyrannical place in Persia. They must have been incredibly brave and wonderful souls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm also wondering, what to you is the value of learning this history so intimately?
I think it tells us who we are. You know, history informs the present. And so it's really nice to know that we're in this new age. Had I not gone back and made this movie, I wouldn't have realized we're in this new age, and really almost the meaning of this age we're in. You know, it's not about having the nicest car or the computer or being on the internet or being on Facebook. It's about learning about unity. It's about the unity of the human race. It's about understanding that for thousands of years, religious books have been pointing to this. And it's about realizing we're here, we've arrived. And so to learn the history, you know, I think one of the reasons I went back and made the movie about the Bab is to tell Christians and Muslims who are waiting for, and Jews who are waiting for the Messiah, the Christ, that he came. But you have to go back to when he came and how it started and what people were expecting. And so to understand that, yes, a lot of Christians, hundreds of thousands of Christians were already waiting for Christ when he came. It's not just like he came and then to understand this history kind of brings us to the present day in a beautiful way.
Thank you. We had a question come in. If someone was wondering if the presentation will be recorded and people will be able to watch it later. Yes, we are recording, and it's streaming live now on Facebook, so you can watch it there. And we are also going to be posting it to our YouTube page. Someone's also wondering about sort of this value of interfaith studies, of studying many different religions. And you are someone, you shared that you studied a few different religions in this sort of process of search. If you could, maybe you could talk about that, the value of interfaith learning as well.
So I was in my 20s, and my friend, I had this Chinese restaurant called Yin Yang's Orient Express, which actually ironically was located just a couple blocks from the Baha'i National Center and a few blocks south of the Baha'i Temple. I never went to the Baha'i Temple then, even though I knew about the faith and even liked the faith, but I never even bothered to go to the Baha'i Temple. But I had this restaurant, and one of my drivers is a very passionate Christian. He's a pastor. And so he asked me, do you want to study the Christian faith? And I said, no, I'm Jewish. And he asked me again, I said, no. And finally on the third try, he asked me, I finally said, okay, whatever, I'll do it. And after a few months of studying the words of Jesus, I couldn't figure out why I didn't believe in him. And so I think it's really important for people to do what I did and get out of my own shell and out of my own cage and say, what's out here? One of the biggest problems with religion is this idea that Jesus is the way, the life, the truth, and no one else but Jesus. And I always say to Christians, you're right, he is. But did you know that Buddha said the same thing? And did you know that Krishna said the same thing? And did you know that Muhammad said the same thing? And the Bab and Baha'u'llah, they all said they were the way. Baha'u'llah said, in fact, that they were all the way. And so each one of them is a messenger in this age that they're coming, saying, I am the way for humanity. And so if we were to get outside our own religion and start studying other religions, we'd start seeing the parallels, the commonalities, and realizing that it's one faith of God, and it would end all wars. I mean, that sounds like a lot, but if you really think about wars, it's because we're different. And if religion were to be used as a unifying force rather than a dividing force, it would unify all of humanity. It has. Religion has progressively, as I was talking about in these other civilizations, unified humanity. And now we're finally at the age with the internet and all the information that we can do this on a global scale. It can be done. And so ask yourself, do you want to live in a world of peace or war? Abdul Baha said this, the son of Baha'u'llah. He said, We've had 6,000 years of war. Perhaps we could try peace for a change. And if we don't like it, we can always go back to war. Let's try peace.
I totally agree. I think it would be great for us to try peace. And I want to also just extend a note of gratitude to you from all of us here at Bahai.chat, and I'm sure to all the many people who have joined us on Zoom and on Facebook. I wanted to share with everyone as well that we do these programs weekly. And next week, our speaker is Eric Dozier, who's going to talk to us about Black American sacred sound and the Baha'i faith. And everyone is welcome. Also, if you're curious to learn more about what we're doing, you can visit our website, Bahai.chat. You can send us an email at info@Bahai.chat. And you can also find us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And also, we have a very special program that we have for people who are interested in hearing more about the Baha'i faith called our Guide Program. So if you're interested if you have a question about the Baha'i faith, or you're interested in hearing more information, or you want to be connected with a Baha'i, you can email us at info@Bahai.chat and include guide in the subject of your email, and we will be sure to connect you with some really wonderful folks who would love to have some fruitful conversations with you and answer questions if you have any.